get started. So good morning, I'm Danielle McFadden. I'm the president of the Greater Lowell Chamber of Commerce. And I want to thank you all for being here today for a virtual coffee with Secretary Mike Kennealy. I certainly have my coffee in hand, presented by the Greater Lowell Chamber of Commerce and the Middlesex 3 Coalition. Please note that this session will be recorded. My colleague Stephanie Cronin, the Executive Director of Middlesex 3, will say a few words and facilitate the Q&A after Secretary Kennealy is done speaking. I want to thank Secretary Mike Kennealy from the Mass Executive Office of Housing and Economic Development for joining us today. I've been fortunate to be included in the Secretary's weekly and now bi-weekly calls throughout the COVID-19 pandemic and have been continually impressed by the response and transparency provided by the Baker-Polito administration and by Secretary Kennealy's accessibility for chambers, business organizations, municipalities, and businesses throughout the Commonwealth. Before I officially introduce Secretary Kennealy, I want to thank our 2021 partners for making this event possible. Platinum, Enterprise Bank and Jeanne Credit Union; Gold, National Grid; Silver, Washington Savings Bank; and Bronze, Mill City Environmental, Town of Chelmsford; Joanne Dennison, the Guidance Counselor for Grownups; Marshall's Auto Body Experts, Lear Realty Partners, Deborah Forgione; Clark Insurance, Joyce Contract Interiors, United Dental, and New England Medical Insurance Agency. I also encourage everybody to put your name and contact info in the chat and to use reactions as you feel fit. I'm a big fan of reactions to make this as interactive as possible. If you have any questions for Secretary Kennealy, please message Stephanie Cronin or raise your hand during the Q&A. We're happy to get those on the agenda. I also want to thank the following people and municipalities for joining us today. And I have to say, I had such a hard time paring down this list. So there's quite a few names on there. We have Peter Milano from the Mass Office of Business Development, from Lowell Economic Development Officer, Christine McCall and Tom Lamond, from Dracut, Town Manager Ann Vandal, Tingsboro, Town Administrator Matt Hanson and Eric Salerno with Economic Development, from Chelmsford, Board of Selectmen Pat Wojcik, Virginia Crockett-Timmons and Lisa Maroney, Economic Development, from Westford, Bruce Rosenberg, Economic Development, Burlington, Melissa Tintocalis, Economic Development, Burlington, I just said Burlington, Wakefield, Economic Development, Erin Kokinda, Reading Economic Development, Erin Schaefer, Lexington Economic Development, Casey Haggerty, my chamber colleague at the Lexington Chamber, Erin Sanlarathy, Allison Lamy from the Lowell Plan and LDFC, Howard Amadon from the Greater Lowell Community Foundation, Peter Farkas from the Mass Hire Greater Lowell Workforce Board, and Jay Donovan from NENCOG. And we also have the wonderful Greater Lowell Chamber Chairwoman, Debbie Callery, here from the Merrimack Valley Food Bank. Okay, I'm done with that part. Now on to the reason we're here, because I know it's not to hear me talk, and I've done plenty of that, Secretary Mike Kennealy. I'm going to put his full bio in the chat, but here are some highlights. As Secretary of Housing and Economic Development, Mike Kennealy is responsible for advancing the Baker-Polito administration's agenda to create economic opportunity for residents, collaborative leadership in communities, an environment that supports job creation and business growth, and new housing for residents through targeted investments. And I can't imagine that any of this has even been slightly challenging over the past year. He joined the administration in 2015 as Assistant Secretary for Business Growth. Kennealy combines a successful track record in the private sector with a strong commitment to the public good. Kennealy and his family live in Lexington, Massachusetts, where they have been highly involved in town government, education, and youth sports. He received an AB in government from Dartmouth College and an MBA from Harvard Business School. Without further ado, welcome Secretary Kennealy.
There we go. Danielle, thanks so much, and great to be with you all today. I think we did this a similar forum sometime over the summer, and great to be back with you all. Stephanie, great to see you as well, and thanks so much for having me, and great to have so many of our municipal partners and business and community partners on the Zoom today. I wanted to just kick off with a couple, I guess, really comments of thanks and acknowledgement. Well, first, I want to acknowledge a couple of folks on my team. We've got a great team here at HED. Peter Milano, who I'm sure many of you know from the Mass Office of Business Development, and Samantha Asker from my team, who has played a really critical role in our communication with the business community, going back really to the beginning of all this now, about 10 months ago. But I think when it's all said and done, and we tell the story of what's happened over these last 10 months, the way the business community has rallied and met the moment, I think is going to be a critical part of that story. And I say that for a number of reasons. One, it's just the communication. We saw early on the need to have an open dialogue with the business community about what we were seeing around the pandemic. And we started doing these weekly calls, as Danielle mentioned, which we now do biweekly. And I know that all the chambers and business people on these calls have been instrumental in trying to get the word out about what was happening. And that kind of communication was absolutely critical. And there were so many other areas where the businesses really rallied to the cause. We recognized early on we had tremendous supply chain problems with personal protective equipment. Well, now today we have 50 manufacturers in Massachusetts making face shields and masks and gowns and other products. They're going to make literally tens of millions of pieces of these products going forward. A great example of the business community rallying. We've had tremendous support by our banks getting small business loans out to support the smallest businesses. So we've done a lot in partnership together, and we're all grateful for the great support and collaboration from so many folks in the business community. If you look at sort of where we've been and where we're going, those will be the bulk of my comments today. If you think back to back in the March, April timeframe and the closure of so-called non-essential businesses, a very difficult period of time for all of us. We developed the reopening strategy over the course of April and May and started that process on May 18th. We're still in that process now, but that was a heavy lift to say the least, and great collaboration from business associations and companies themselves on that. And then as we got well into reopening, we started developing a comprehensive economic recovery strategy for the state. And so I want to touch on that a little bit and talk about some specific programs. But first, let me just say that we got a lot more work to do, but we've had some good news of late and some modest improvements, at least in the public health data that we've all been tracking now for some time. That led us to announce last week that the early closure of businesses, that 9:30 closure of businesses, was going to be lifted starting Monday of this week. So Monday the 25th, that 9:30 closure has gone away. We still have capacity limits on businesses of 25%, and the gathering limits are going to remain in place for another couple of weeks now. But we are seeing some improvements in the public health data. And as always, we'll consider what we can do with respect to loosening restrictions and further reopening going forward. Obviously, some of the best news in all this are the vaccines, and the fact that vaccines are now being administered and more widely available. There's a lot of information about the vaccine strategy on the mass.gov website. It's mass.gov COVID vaccine. We can send that around to folks. But we will be beginning phase 2 of the vaccine distribution on February 1st, which means individuals who are age 75 and over can start getting vaccinated next week. And I mentioned all the details are available there. I expect the business community will play a role as well in this chapter of the pandemic. And we've certainly asked folks to communicate information and the benefits and safety of the vaccine to their employees, encourage employees whenever it's available to get the vaccine. And there are opportunities for employees to host to actually administer the vaccine and work with a healthcare provider as part of something we call the Mass COVID Vaccine Program, MCVP. We can send some information about that one as well. But some good news lately around public health metrics and vaccine distribution. I want to come back to the notion of economic recovery. It's been really at the top of our mind for us, again, as we get further into the reopening process over the summer. And along the way, we've tried to be helpful, particularly to our smallest companies. We had some capital programs very early on in the pandemic. We tried to provide hands-on technical assistance to businesses. But as we got further on over the summer months, we thought we should really come forward with a comprehensive economic recovery strategy. And we announced that back in October. It's called Partnerships for Recovery. And it focuses on a number of areas: supporting our small businesses, supporting our downtowns and our main streets, which obviously have gone through tremendous challenges and changes these last 10 months. Promoting more housing equity and opportunity and stability. That's a critical part of our strategy. Housing's always been a core part of our economic development strategy. Continuing to innovate and lead. Our efforts in the innovation economy, I think in so many ways will be what will play a big role getting us out of this current economic softness and getting back to the kind of growth and full employment we had before. And finally, getting people back to work. That's a core part of our economic recovery strategy. So this 5-point strategy was announced back in October. It's a $774 million strategy. And since then, we've been rolling out a variety of programs to execute on the recovery strategy. And I'll touch on a few of those and give you an update on some of the recent things we've been working on. As you may have seen, we, as part of the recovery strategy and then some additional capital we applied to that, have been rolling out a small business grant program. And so this is over $700 million in grants available for our small businesses through the Mass Growth Capital Corporation. We've been doing these on a rolling basis now for a few weeks. But so far, $232 million has gone out the door to help support over 4,700 of our smallest businesses. We've had a focus in a couple different respects. One is on sort of the profile of the business, really trying to get to some of our businesses that are minority owned, women owned, inner gateway cities, the companies that historically have had the hardest time accessing capital. And so that's been part of the strategy. Another part of the strategy has been helping to support the industries that have been hardest hit. And so trying to map the capital to where the restrictions have hurt the businesses. So naturally, you think about restaurants and small retail and other industries. So those are being rolled out now, and obviously mindful of the fact now, thankfully, with the federal legislation, there'll be a lot more federal money available as well. I've always wanted to point out the fact that there's only so much the state can do from a capital standpoint, and so you think about $700 million is a lot of money. It's meaningful. In the first round of the Paycheck Protection Program, the state got about $14 billion. And so we're happy to come to the table with the capital we can provide, but also very grateful that there's additional federal support that will now, well, actually, that is now available there. So support for small business is a core part of the recovery strategy. I mentioned supporting our downtowns. We've had a great program called Shared Streets and Spaces. We had the first iteration in that program over the fall, and we recognized that for our restaurants and our retailers, having more outdoor space for dining and outdoor commerce was a really important component of their ability to survive these challenging times. And so these are capital grants to municipalities to help them build out such spaces. And so, for example, Billerica has received $79,000 to improve pedestrian safety. They've installed solar powered pedestrian safety beacons in areas that have been deemed to be close to where retail and outdoor dining may happen. So, and again, nice use of that capital. Similarly, in Lowell, Lowell's received $70,000 to support an existing outdoor dining program that we think is going to benefit about 20 restaurants in that region. So again, supporting our downtown is a critical part of the strategy. We recognize as well, it's been a very challenging time for anybody in the tourism industry. And so just last week, we announced that the Mass Office of Travel and Tourism is rolling out $1 million program for marketing projects to support something called the My Local MA campaign. That's a campaign we announced over the summer to really help. I've always said it's been a campaign for hearts and minds to get people to think about where they're spending their dollars. Okay, and so before people buy something online, think about, geez, can I go down to Main Street and buy that same product there? How can I support my local restaurants? How can I be a tourist in my own state? You know, travel's a different matter these days, but how can I think about supporting the tourism destinations across the Commonwealth? And so this campaign's been going on now for quite some time, and with great engagement by the business community and others. But we thought, let's come up with some more dollars to help our local destinations market themselves. And so that program is rolling out right now. I think it's going to be a real success. As part of getting people back to work, and let me say a few words on that one. You know, pre-pandemic, we had unemployment that was sub 3%. We were beyond anyone's definition of a full employment economy, and that had been the case for some time now. Our unemployment peaked at 17.7% over the summer. It's back down now in single digits, but we are very concerned about the changes that pandemic has created among, frankly, a big chunk of our workforce. I think you're going to gradually see jobs get added back as we go here, but we are worried about a part of the workforce that may be at risk for medium and long-term unemployment. And so how do we develop strategies to help get those folks back to work? You know, there's a lot that goes into that in terms of employer engagement, working with our community colleges and vocational technical schools, and doubling down on strategies we've had for a long time now about creating that alignment between the schools and industry and helping to fund programs and helping the schools build out capacity to serve more students. But we also recognize that broadband connectivity has to be part of that equation, that folks need to make sure they have a connection to access training, and access a job. And so we rolled out a program called Mass Internet Connect earlier this month, and it's in partnership with the Mass Hire Career Centers, and it's subsidized internet access and providing internet accessible devices to those that are looking for a job through the Mass Hire system. I think that kind of subsidy is a critical step to help keep people connected, help them engage in job searches and job placement. We're also expanding free Wi-Fi hotspots, primarily in gateway cities and other parts of the state. But this idea of connectivity in a world where we're doing a lot more online and working from home, and folks need help perhaps accessing job placement services and jobs themselves, I think that's going to be an important part of it. For our nonprofit cultural institutions, again, I know it's been a very challenging time for them, to say the least. The Mass Cultural Council, as part of our recovery strategy, announced about $10 million in grants to 183 cultural organizations, including the Merrimack Repertory Theater in Lowell. Proud to support those organizations with this capital. And then finally, I want to touch on the economic development bill the legislature passed and the governor signed a couple weeks ago. This again will help us on a medium and long-term basis to get back to the kind of economy we want to have. And there's a number of things in that bill. We're delighted the legislature passed it and the governor signed it. But there's a whole set of capital programs around additional support for small business, additional programs for our communities, additional housing capital programs to create more transit-oriented, affordable housing, climate-resilient housing, help our communities take abandoned or underutilized buildings and repurpose them for either housing or commercial opportunities. There's a lot in that bill, and we're very pleased to have those capital resources available now going forward. And that, again, will help drive our recovery. And sorry, one more point about the bill. There's substantial capital in there for our additional efforts in the innovation economy. And so again, this theme of, we want to provide relief to the companies and the sectors that have been hardest hit, but also we got to keep our foot on the gas in terms of the innovation economy. It's such a core part of our strategy now for so long. And so building on work done by our Mass Tech Collaborative to identify some of these new sectors in innovation, things like financial technology and quantum computing and the blue economy and other areas, now having the capital resources to make those investments in partnership with higher education, again, to really stake out a leadership position in some of these sectors. A final point about the economic development bill is something called housing choice, which I know a lot of folks on this call are probably familiar with. It's been something the governor filed about 3 years ago, and it's targeted zoning reform to help our communities build the kind of housing they want. For literally 100 years, it's been state law that any rezoning of a property for any purpose anywhere in the state requires a 2/3 vote of the local legislative body, be that town meeting or city council. The Housing Choice Initiative proposes, and now is reality, that for a set of housing development best practices, that vote threshold is now a simple majority, not a supermajority. I think it's going to have the impact of unlocking production of all kinds of housing across the state. We're very excited to see this now get over the finish line. I always say we were using the term housing crisis long before we ever heard of COVID-19. We've had a very, very challenging housing situation in the Commonwealth for quite some time, and delighted to see this one get over the finish line. And this kind of targeted zoning reform paired with the capital programs we've had for a long time and our deep commitment to building more affordable housing, I think it's going to go a long way to get us out of this housing crisis. Final thing I mentioned, particularly for our municipal partners on the phone, is something called the One Stop for Growth. And we announced this last week, and it is a fundamentally, I think, different and better way for us to deliver our community development programs. We run a lot of different programs here at HED, and historically they have all operated kind of on different timetables with different application deadlines and processes, and they weren't really aligned in a way that you could say, I want to access multiple ones of these programs to support a project. Well, the One Stop takes care of that, and you'll see this. You'll see a lot more detail on this one soon. But it is a single application portal that's an entryway to a lot of our capital programs, where municipalities will come in and ask for support for a project and be able to articulate what their objectives, what their strategy is, and then we will then go do the work to figure out how to fund it. And I think it's going to get our municipal partners out of the business of chasing a lot of individual grants, but rather coming to us in a much more collaborative way and asking support for what they want to do, and have us put the component pieces together to provide that support. So I hope those comments are helpful. A little bit of recap of the history we've been on, together, very much together these last 10 months. Grateful as always for the partnership of the business community, and we're all delighted to see some improvements in the public health metrics. We're very excited about this recovery strategy, what it means for a short, medium, and long term. And as always, look forward to working with you as we go forward here.
So thank you, Secretary Kennealy, and thanks for joining us and updating us. That you put a lot in there. There's just a lot to unpack, and we appreciate we appreciate all your work and your responsiveness, the resources you've listened to us, and I think it shows with many of those programs. I know we only have you until 9:45 or 9:50, so time is short. So I do want to ask if anyone has questions, if they can just either put them in the chat and I can read them, or raise your hand, either your real hand, your virtual hand, and we can call on you. One thing until I see. Oh wait, I think I do see Joe. And Joe, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, why don't we go ahead?
Thank you, Secretary Kennealy. I want to first start off by saying how much I appreciate the efforts that you are making at the state level to do things. But I am the business manager for 4 restaurants, one of which is in Lowell. And I have to say that from the restaurant perspective, the state curfew really doesn't have as much of a net effect to us being removed as the capacity limit. And it was really disappointing to see the governor and the state go to that capacity limit, where at the beginning of this pandemic last year, there were measures put in place where as long as we could ensure 6 feet distance and we're using the proper protocols and be safe, the restaurants can open and maximize the space that they have. I have 4 restaurants with 4 different spacing configurations. And if you read everything that the governor says, that restaurants aren't the reason why this pandemic is spreading, I really feel like this capacity limit was very punitive to an industry like ours. Now, I totally understand other industries, maybe that capacity had to be, but I honestly don't understand why that effort was put in. And honestly, I believe that the better thing to have removed would have been the capacity limit for restaurants than the curfew. It has no net effect, for us, whereas the capacity limit really has put us in a position where we're not even making payroll right now because we can't bring in enough customers, even with takeout, to meet those guidelines. And I just honestly have to say that I really feel like that effort was very punitive to restaurants by putting that capacity limit in. If we were super spreaders, I totally would get it. That would be great. You look at grocery stores, you look at so many other industries that have not been hurt as much, and no one does anything to enforce mask mandates and things there. But here in restaurants, if we're allegedly not the cause of this, I don't understand why that kind of action was taken. So I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, Joe, I hear you. And let me say a couple things to that. First of all, we clearly didn't want to do it. And I have heard a few different versions of which one's more punitive, either the restriction or the hours. So I'm glad at least we could execute on getting rid of the curfew, if you will. But no, I get it, and we want to get that lifted as soon as we think it's prudent to do so. We also, in putting that restriction in place, coincided with rolling out the capital program, and clearly coincided with some of the federal resources being available now. And so while we think the 25% limit across the board is an important part of keeping the virus numbers down or trying to get them down, we also recognize we had to come to the table with some capital to help people get through that period of time. We had, as you can imagine, there's a lot of different points of view on this. We certainly heard from a lot of people thinking that we should shut down indoor dining. We never wanted to do that. There's a lot of science we looked at that said, if you get it down to 25%, you can limit 80+% of the transmission. That seemed to be kind of an optimal place to be in terms of both trying to keep activity going and trying to limit virus transmission. But I'm not going to pretend it creates an easy dynamic for any business. And we hope we're going to see some improvements soon on these metrics. We got very, very concerned about where the numbers are going after Thanksgiving. And so if you look at the history of where we've been with reopening, for example, our positive test rate was about 11% when we started reopening. It got down below 1% in the late August, early September timeframe, and the cases went down dramatically as well. Cases skyrocketed after Thanksgiving, and in so many respects, what we were hoping to get to was avoid after Christmas what we saw after Thanksgiving. Now, thankfully, we haven't quite had that experience, but if you look at where the numbers were trending after Thanksgiving, kind of late November, early December timeframe, it was pretty darn concerning, and that's what caused us to put in place a whole set of restrictions that I hope over time are going to be lifted. But like I said, I'm not going to pretend it creates an easy dynamic, but I hope between continuing to be open at that level, plus some of the capital resources available, restaurants and all businesses can get through this challenging period of time.
Thank you, Joe, for that question. And can you include your restaurant information in the chat so we all have that? Appreciate that.
It's in there. Thank you, though.
Thank you. So, okay, Bruce, I see Bruce from the town of Westford. Go ahead, Bruce, unmute yourself.
Yeah, okay. First, thank you, Secretary Kennealy, for this honest and sincere candor of information. My question is, we've talked a lot about what the response was, obviously, to this pandemic. The question I have is, can you talk something about lessons learned, things to help the immunity going forward of what people seem to widely predict will be a recurring type of challenge here?
Lessons learned about trying to limit the spread of the virus,
lessons learned in terms of how perhaps building in some greater fault tolerance or redundancy management, or being somewhat more preemptive, whether it's reducing the timeline that reacting to, but obviously, the recovery, there's a lot of lessons learned, one of which you already mentioned. For example, making sure we're addressing broadband so that we take care of students and so on. But I suspect that there are other lessons. I was originally going to ask the question using the Biden bumper sticker, Build Back Better, is perhaps another way of couching the question.
Yeah, well, Bruce, it's a really good question. I think with the benefit of more hindsight, we can fully digest kind of the lessons learned. But let me touch on a couple things. I mentioned challenges around the supply chain. That's an example. We're going to be in a way better position now going forward. I mean, this manufacturing emergency response team and getting 50 companies here on the home team, if you will, to start producing these products. I don't think we're ever going to be in the position we were in back in March, where it was literally a global hunt for these types of products. We're going to make this stuff here, and that's going to have real impacts on public health if God forbid something like this happens again, and real impacts on our economy. And through that, I think our manufacturers have learned a lot. And so our manufacturing sector is going to be, I think, in a better shape economically and provide more of these products on a go-forward basis. I think there's a lot of examples of this. I think back on the housing side of my world, we have a lot of challenges now around housing instability and people in danger of being evicted. And we've created something called the Eviction Diversion Initiative, which we announced back in October. And we're trying to think about just fundamentally different and better ways to get out rental assistance to people. Again, a big spike in the volume of demand for rental assistance. It's a program administered through 11 regional agencies. It historically has been a largely paper-based system, a largely decentralized system. We're trying to think about ways to really use data and use an electronic delivery system and really provide more hands-on assistance and collaboration with those agencies. That stuff will live on, post-pandemic. So I think to answer your question, I'm thinking more about things that are going to live on after the pandemic that are fundamentally better and different. There's going to be a number of things like that. I think we've learned a lot more about how to provide assistance to our small businesses. And we've always had, I think, a pretty robust technical assistance program for small businesses. We've doubled down on that strategy in a big way. We helped through our Massachusetts Capital Corporation and the MACDCs provide something called the COVID Stabilization Network. We have 50 technical systems providers around the state helping out our smallest companies. I think they're learning a lot more specifically about the needs of our small businesses. So there's a lot of things we're going to put in place now. I think they're going to survive the pandemic and ultimately will help create perhaps a different and better economy going forward.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Bruce. And I see Brian Murray from Cummings Property also has his hand raised. Brian, go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, Secretary Kennealy, and thank you for your time. I have a question regarding the Economic Development Bill that was recently passed, and the way in which that funds will then be distributed to communities to support their economic growth. Will that be principally by your executive office, and is the one-stop shop for growth the best place for communities to go to understand how they might access that funding that supports growth?
Yeah, the short answer to your question is yes, that is the best place to go. And we operate the one stop this year, our first year, is going to have 10 different capital programs, 3 of which are new programs in the bill. So they've just been created. And as we roll out our capital programs for the fiscal year 2022 and beyond, those will be delivered through the one stop. And you think about a program like our MassWorks infrastructure program, the brownfields and site readiness programs through mass development, our new abandoned buildings program. There's a lot in there. Our urban agenda program. We've got a program now for increased technical assistance for communities. All that's going to be in that one stop. And I think it's just going to be a better way to do things. We as part of this exercise, we asked ourselves, okay, let's take a set of hypothetical projects and ask how a community could get the full benefit of our programs to execute on that project. And as you run through that exercise, you realize, well, geez, there's probably 5 programs that could help. And there's 5 different deadlines running from May to September. And in some cases, different decision makers. And we weren't getting the benefit of a holistic view of what a community wanted to accomplish. And a critical part of the one-stop process is going to be something called an expression of interest, where the community will come in the early part of the year and just tell us, look, here are the things we're trying to accomplish. Here are the projects that are important to us. And we can provide a lot more feedback early on around that. And direct people to the right programs to encourage people. Yeah, this seems like the right project at the right time. Please apply for funding through the one stop. I think it's a very different way to do our jobs and think about our jobs. And it gets us out of the position just of sort of passively reviewing requests for funding and gets us in a much more strategic and collaborative role with our community. So we're really excited about this.
Great, thank you. That sounds like a very efficient way to connect with communities and
I think
support
so.
growth.
Yeah,
But thank you.
Wonderful. And I don't see any other hands up there, but
There's a question in the chat. I don't know if you saw that from Christine McCall.
Oh, I didn't. Actually, I did have a question. Christine, if you don't mind, I'm going to jump into my question first, and then I'll read over yours, because I do want to hear from the secretary before our time is up. And I always like to hear what other regions are doing that we should be best practices, examples, ways that we can improve our area as well too. And I want to throw that out, but I'm also really interested in digging more into the vaccination and what the business community, the community in general can be doing in order to make certain that our residents, employees are vaccinated in terms of outreach or more sites or promotion.
Yeah. So Stephanie, on the first point, I've been part of we do a call every what's today, Wednesday, 7:30 a.m. on Wednesdays with myself and counterparts of mine in 6 other states. We've had this kind of 7-state collaborative now for a while, and it's been a useful way to compare notes, talk about what's happening in our individual states, to some extent align what our strategies are. That's, you can imagine the complexities involving 7 states with a single aligned strategy. We haven't quite got there yet, but there are things we're talking about and comparing notes, and that's been a helpful way to address the problem. I say that with the caveat that every state's experience has been somewhat different in this. You know, we've been by most metrics kind of the 3rd hardest hit state behind New York and New Jersey. So it's been useful to compare notes and collaborate to some degree, and I've enjoyed my dialogue with my 6 counterparts. On the vaccine, we made some announcements this week around vaccine distribution. Encourage folks to take a look at the site. We'll get that address around to people. But I think a critical part of this for businesses is understanding where their industry falls into the phasing strategy, and really trying to communicate to their employees that it's important to get vaccinated, that it's safe to do so. And this idea of hosting clinics for employees if they're interested, I'm probably not the best person to talk directly on that one, but there is the ability to work with a healthcare provider if you're working with one already. For example, if companies provide flu shots today, well, they might also think about providing the COVID vaccine as well. But we'll find a way to get the right information out to this group on that one.
Wonderful. I appreciate it. I'm going to circle back to Christine's question from the city of Lowell. George, will get to you in just a second too. And Secretary, can you tell us if there's been any discussion about allowing some suspended rules under the emergency order surrounding liquor licenses and outdoor activities under the state of emergency to be permanently modified, and regarding the selling of beer, wine off presence as well?
Yeah, frankly, we haven't quite got to that one yet, but there are a number of things we're going to have to talk about as we exit the state of emergency. And it gets back a little bit to Bruce's question. What are the things that we've done that are going to live on, post-pandemic? And how can we help facilitate that? And so I've mentioned outdoor dining a couple of times and outdoor commerce. That's happening in ways now that never happened before. Well, we should really make sure that's part of our strategy, part of our picture going forward. And what are the things state government could do in concert with local government to make sure that happens? So there's a list of topics like that we need to get to.
Great, thank you. And I think we have time for one more question. And George, did you have a question, or were you just raising your hand?
Yeah, just a real quick question. Thank you very much for being here today. I always appreciate your comments and what you've been doing. On the vaccinations, a lot of fanfare about today. Get signed up for those us old people, phase 2, and line up and all that. And so I went to the website, and still very limited. I assume, I wouldn't be asking this question except you're here right now, but it's one of those things. I assume in a few days will be up. I live in Reading, and there was nothing available for any Reading residents. So I'm just assuming that in a week from now, things will sort itself out, and maybe there'll be Walgreens and CVS plus everything else available.
Yeah, George, I think that's right. We said yesterday that, or 2 days ago rather, that we're building towards 165 vaccination sites across the Commonwealth, and we think we'll get to the number by mid-February. So I think you're going to see a lot more in terms of available sites and information from us as we roll out the strategy now in the coming weeks.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much, and good luck with everything.
Thank you. Thanks.
And I guess I'll echo that as well too. And if you guys have been great partners, with us. It's been great working with you, Peter Milano. It's a great team. If there's ways that we can partner as well, we'd like to. But I guess with that, I don't know if there are any other questions or thoughts, but I think we're approaching our time. Danielle?
Yes, thank you all for being here. Thank you again to Secretary Kennealy for carving out the time. I know you're extremely busy. We appreciate you being here, and we really appreciate you. So thank you. I wanted to thank our Platinum partners one more time, Enterprise Bank and Jeanne Credit Union. I'm going to encourage everybody right now. Let's use our reactions. Let's all give Stephanie a round of applause for facilitating the Q&A. See those hands out there.
Thank you.
And I will save the chat and send the chat out to everybody that registered, as well as a recording of this. So that is all I have. But thank you again, everybody. Have a wonderful day.
And thank you. Thank you, Secretary Kennealy.
Great to see you all. Great to be with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.